and good to be speaking about this. I'll give a very quick introduction about myself and what we do. I'm Prathamesh, I'm CTO and co-founder at Nanonets, and I'm going to be talking about like our inbound GTM, especially the early days, right? Because I see that like a lot of founders are young, in their seed stage. So I'll be talking a lot about like how did we started building GTM, not a lot about like how did we scale it. But yeah, this is a very quick introduction about Nanonets. We are basically a workflow automation platform, and our customers are other companies that use us to automate their manual processes, especially the ones that involve a lot of documents or any kind of unstructured data. We use AI heavily in making that conversion from unstructured to structured. We have about 400 plus customers worldwide, primarily in US and Europe. Those are the primary geographies that we target. But we have also customers all over the world because of our inbound GTM motion, where like people figure out what we do and they sign up on our platform from all over the world. But yeah, we were part of Y Combinator. We got into Y Combinator in about 2017. We have raised our Series A from Elevation. It's been, I think, a year and a half, almost 2 years. But that's where we are at right now. And feel free to stop me anytime if you have any questions. So this is how our US traffic looks like currently. And I mean, I think we are doing pretty well compared to our competitors. Some of these competitors are sort of startups, but they have raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Some of the companies are there for more than 20 years. They are market leaders with more than 200 million ARR in a year, right? But still, I think we have ended up sort of beating all of them in terms of our inbound and traffic. I know traffic is, it's not a good metric to measure. I mean, it's kind of like a vanity metric, but still, it gives you some representation of where we are at. People often tell you that inbound, it's going to plateau at certain point of time. But even after reaching this level, for example, in the last 12 months, right, we grew our traffic by about 300%, right? And that's, I think, exceptional growth at this point, where even today, we primarily rely on inbound marketing for all of our leads, right? Like almost 98% of our leads come from inbound. We have recently started doing ads and outbound email campaigns, etc., but primarily rely on inbound. And it's not like, it at least doesn't look like it's going to plateau very soon. So this is kind of like our sales motion. So we have like a self-serve product. People find us through our content marketing, about 400K monthly volume. Not all of those people are going to have intent to use our product, right? Like some of those are just coming to read some blog article, they'll drop off from there. But we have a self-serve product where people can sign up, they can use our product for free. Some of them have like a valid use case where they would actually use it for something useful, right? Like it's like a commercial use case. And then we do a lot of automated reach outs after that, right? I think somebody here was telling me that they just visited our website right now, and immediately they got an email saying that this is the introduction of Nanonets, what we do, what is your use case, etc. But that's the kind of sort of motion that we sort of sell with. And typically after reach outs, you get a call scheduled with one of our AEs. So it's not completely self-serve motion. You can call it like a sales assist, where customers have already used part of our product. They understand what we do. They know if it's a good fit. And after we set up call with our account executives, right? Where our account executives know a lot about that customer. What is the kind of use case that they're coming with? What are the kind of documents that they want to process? Right? Or how good the platform works for that customer. So they have all of this information, and that makes, I think selling much more efficient. And I believe that whenever you are sort of heavily relying on inbound, right, you need this middle kind of sort of pre-qualification is what we call it, right? You need it to remove all of the junk users, right? Who don't have any intent. But this is the kind of sort of motion that we follow. It's like a PLG motion with inbound heavy, like, top of the funnel or lead generation. And I think this is like, I think very interesting thing that we recently found out. Typically, we sell to not like, very large enterprises. We sell to SMB mid-market. And like, we don't even want to sell to enterprises at this point, right? Because we know that they'll just slow us down very much. But like, this was one very interesting statistics that like, just with content, right? Roughly 34% of Fortune 500 customers, right? Like they have at least interacted with our product, where like somebody from those organizations have signed up on our product, they have read our blogs, and like sort of they have explored what we do, etc. And this was very strange for us because like we don't sell to Fortune 500s, we don't specifically target or like write content for these people, but still I mean like if you write quality content, people are somehow going to find you through SEO, etc. So yeah, so I mean, like I mentioned, right, like we started back in 2017, and to give you a little bit of context of like what 2017 was like for AI, I think it was one of the breakout years for AI. You had like ResNets and those kind of like image models coming in. They were sort of surpassing human accuracies in several kind of tasks. The famous Transformers paper was also written in the same year, and at that point, we knew that like AI is going to be like a very powerful tool in arsenal of any company, right? But there are not going to be enough machine learning engineers who can actually productionize AI, or like make use of it in whatever their task is. So we saw that there are a lot of these developers who understand that like ML is somehow helpful, but they don't know the details of it, right? So they'll go to, for example, Stack Overflow. They will like ask questions like I know that there is something called TensorFlow. I know that there is something called an inception network. I want to add like few classes. How do I do it, right? So there is this big gap of knowledge between like what people wanted to do and if they could actually do it, right? And like we basically wanted to build like a platform for developers to help them like bridge this gap, right? Where in no-code manner they could just come to Nanonets. They could solve their problem with AI, right? They didn't need to know about like all of these details. The platform should take care of that. And this was the context, and we applied like so this was the basically problem that we wanted to solve, and we applied to YC. Before applying, we did not have any product. We just had this idea, right? And we were like we applied. We got an invitation for the interview, and it's a very short interview, right? Like it's I think about 10 to 15 minutes. And we're just brainstorming, what do we talk about? It's a very sort of like, cramped interview, right? Where there are a bunch of people asking you like, sort of continuous questions. And we were sort of preparing, what do we do, right? Like, what do we talk about? We don't have any product. So what we did was we like, sort of took this exact screenshot, we took a printout, and we went to interview, right? And I think this one printout basically talks about everything that we wanted to do. It talks about, like the kind of persona that we want to target, what is the kind of problem that they're having, and how we are going to solve it, right? And based on this, I mean, like we got into Y Combinator without having a product in place. And I think like after we got into Y Combinator, the first month, right, like or at least first 3 weeks was like both of us are engineers, so we were like sort of heads down building the product, building an initial MVP, and after we thought that like we have something in place, right, that we can actually sell or market. So we set up this office hours with our group partner. Our group partner was Sam Altman at that time. So we set up a call, like a office hour or like meeting with him, right? And it's a very short meeting. I remember it's like a 2-minute meeting, right? So we were like, we have built this product. Now we want to figure out like how do we get it in the hands of our potential customers, right? And we were kind of expecting like the answers from him, right? That like maybe reach out to your network, do a lot of outbound, or like maybe run ads. And YC, to give you a context, it's a very small period, right? Like it's 3 months you have to basically build the product, to sell it to customers, to get traction, and if possible, like get some revenue, right? And after 3 months, you have this big demo day where you have to present like your product or like your entire pitch to maybe hundreds of Silicon Valley investors, and it's a very small period, right? So we're expecting Sam to tell us how to quickly get customers. And this is the kind of advice that Sam gives us, right? Like, rank your blog post on Hacker News. And coming out of that meeting, we were like super confused. And it was almost like a mixed reaction. Mixed because, one, we were expecting him to give us like, some quick hacks, right? Like, how do you get to customers as quickly as possible, because we don't have enough time, right? But he talks about like, writing some blog post. We're also slightly happy because both of us are engineers. We were super scared of like actually talking to people. So we're like, it's a good thing, right? Like, you just write some blog, you publish, and then like, people will come, right? But I mean, like, in the hindsight, it was really good advice. I'll maybe like, sort of go a little bit deeper into it, right? So if you sort of break down this advice, right? And it's a very short advice, I mean, like, very simple sentence. But if you break it down, right? Like, the first thing is Hacker News. So, for example, he knew that like, we are targeting developers, right? And Hacker News is, I think, like, one of the best places for developers where you would find all of the developers who hang out on Hacker News. They have very high social clout, right? I mean, they are like, developers with a lot of power. If they post something, a lot of people listen to them. So it's a very good platform that is really good fit for, what we were trying to do, right? We were trying to reach developers. Second, lot of other publications, right? Like secondary publications, pick up articles from Hacker News because they know that if you're going to rank something on Hacker News, it's going to be a top quality article, right? So, so if you get your article to rank on Hacker News, a lot of other publications pick it up. Also, it indirectly gives you a lot of high quality backlinks, right? And at that time, we did not know what backlinks are, all of that, right? Like, we're just following this simple advice. Yeah. So, yeah, so Hacker News is basically like, you just post something and people upvote or downvote, right? But if you get to the first page of Hacker News, right, then you start getting a lot of engagement. So it's kind of like a democratic way of like, figuring out what is a good content for developers, right? So backlinks, again, we did not know what backlinks are at that time, but backlinks are basically other sources who are like, sort of referring to your domain, right? So they are saying that like, Nanonets is, Nanonets has written this wonderful article about, like this topic. So they will sort of give you a backlink, and backlink helps you with, for example, SEO and stuff, right? Google looks at, if a reputed source has talked about Nanonets, then obviously Nanonets is like, sort of talking something super important, right? So we should maybe give them higher rank in Google search as well. But yeah, so like, this is the first part of the advice, right? Like Hacker News. The platform, or like, what we call channel. The second part of advice was, like the blog post, right? For example, he could have told us that like, build like a great landing page, or like, build like a great demo and host that somewhere, right? But the thing that like, he told us to write the blog post is really important because the channel that you pick, right? Like Hacker News, you have to build content that is good fit for the channel. For example, if you publish like a landing page on Hacker News, right? People are not going to even look at it, right? Like they will just like sort of keep downvoting you until like, sort of you go on like the 100th page, right? But the blog post is like, like a really wonderful sort of content for Hacker News because it's informational. It's like it's talking about a topic in like, sort of lot more depth. You can add a lot of content to it, and these are like, very long form articles, right? Second thing about Hacker News, and like, especially publishing a blog on Hacker News, is that you will generate a lot of feedback and discussion on Hacker News, right? And I have some screenshots to share our early post. And Hacker News people are like, very brutal, right? They'll just kill you. I mean, they will tell you that, like, what is it that, you are doing? This is never going to work. And like, I think a famous example is Dropbox founder, right? He built an early version of Dropbox, and he posted it on Hacker News. And people were like, what is this? I'll build it in a day with my Linux box, right? So it's a very brutal kind of channel. But still you get like, a lot of feedback and like, good discussion happens on the thread, right? You also generate a lot of ideas for like, what to do next, right? People will like sort of poke holes into what kind of content that you have posted, right? Like they'll tell you that, like you completely missed this part, right? And that is a great like, sort of next piece of content to write. The most important part of like, this advice, right? Like what you are asking about is rank, right? Like what do you mean by rank? So Hacker News is a platform where you publish an article, and developers would either upvote it or downvote it, right? And unless the article is really, really high quality, right? Almost it should be the kind of article that has never been written before, right? You have to do something entirely new. And only then people will sort of give you a lot of love and upvotes, and then it will end up ranking very high. So it needs it almost forces you to create really, really high quality content. Also what happens is that initially when you're starting with content, right? You don't, I think few speakers previously told you that it takes 9 to 12 months to properly do SEO, and after that you'll start getting traffic, right? But it's almost like an inorganic way of getting traffic, where that Hacker News gets a lot of traffic, right? And if you get a good rank there, people are also going to read your blog post, and it's almost like a hacky way of getting that initial traffic when you don't have SEO or all of that thing figured out, right? So you get a lot of initial traffic, but it also helps you with ranking, where Google looks at all of these attributes, right? Like how many people are reading your articles, is there low bounce rate, are people getting just bored with first paragraph and leaving, or are they reading the entire article, right? Which again ties back to quality. But all of these things help you with SEO as well. And like I mentioned, search engines also end up picking your article very quickly after this. So these are some of the examples of what we wrote about and what we posted. You would see some of the feedback that is very brutal, right? They'll tell you that what you're saying is completely wrong, ignore it. But you have to basically have very thick skin and figure out what are the useful advices, right? Or what are the new ideas that you get from publishing this content. This is another example. But this is, I think, if you have to maybe take out one piece of advice, right? It's quality always trumps quantity, right? And I'll tell you what does it take to build a quality article, right? And these are initial days, right? Where it was just two of us, right? Founders. So just to write this one blog post, right? What we did was, and the title of blog post is how to, with deep learning, how do you detect objects on a small Raspberry Pi? Raspberry Pi is a very small chip. So what we did was we bought a Raspberry Pi, we mounted it on our car. Obviously, I didn't know how to drive, so that driving part my co-founder had to do. But I was just involved in writing all of the code. But we drove through Mumbai traffic, we collected all of the footage, we quantized models to run on that small chip. And in the end, we gave all of that code away in the article that we had written, right? And all of this effort, this 3 weeks effort, just to create this one high quality article, right? And I think in the initial days, you have to go to that length to create quality content, because otherwise it's not going to rank or give you any traffic, right? So I think this is sort of a very quick gist about our 0 to 1 playbook. Again, this might not directly be transferable to everybody, but this is what we learned, right? Content, I think you have to start from day one, because it takes a lot of time to build skill set, right? And it has to be almost founder-led, I would say. You can't just hire content writers and ask them to write content, because what you're essentially doing is you're not only writing content, but while writing that content, right, and high quality content, you're also figuring out parts of your product, right? What are the things that people like? What are the things that people don't like, right? What are the things that people like to build themselves versus they're okay using some other platform, right? So all of these things you figure out while writing the content. So in the initial days, I would say founders have to start writing content and going through this journey, right? You have to almost find, I think a lot of people spoke about ICP, right? How do you figure out ICP? So I would not go into details of that. Our ICP was very simple. It was developers. Both I and my co-founder were developers, so we knew the ICP very well, which is why it was very easy for us to write this content. But you have to find maybe one channel where most of your ICP or those kind of people hang out, right? For us, it was Hacker News, right? But for your industry, it could be something else. But you have to almost focus on that one channel and figure out what does it mean to be successful on that channel. right? What kind of content works for that channel? For example, Reddit, right? Like slightly different kind of content works for Reddit versus Hacker News. So you have to find that channel, you have to find where people spend most of their time at, write something that like, they would love to read, focus on quality, but also distribute heavily on other channels, right? Initially, you don't have ranking. You can't expect that you just write something and like, traffic comes to your blog, right? You have to also distribute a lot on other channels. For example, what we did was we, again, like, found out what are the kind of LinkedIn or Facebook groups where developers like, are talking about machine learning. Whenever we posted something on Hacker News, we would also go to those groups and like, we would start a discussion about our blog, right? We would post a link saying that like, this is something that I published. Do you have any feedback, etc.? And we actually ended up generating a lot of leads initially, like, just by doing this, right? And it's very hacky way, but it works. Another advice, I mean, don't worry about keywords, technical SEO, all of that, right? I mean, like, one, like, what you will end up doing is, like, you'll just end up getting, like, sort of overwhelmed with, like, the technicalities of SEO, but all of this is very secondary, right? You have to focus on quality content and, like, the channel. Don't worry about all of these things. Keep iterating your content from feedback. If people are telling you that, like, this is something that you missed in your article, right? Like, write another article about it. And another advice is, I mean, like, it's okay to measure leading indicators like views, number of shares, upvotes, celebrate, like when you get something ranked on, like, the channel that you are targeting, right? Again, I mean, I think some of these are like vanity metrics when you actually start running business. But I would say in the initial journey, right, all of these indicators are the ones that you can measure. But like this, you should measure, right? Like they are in the end, like, leading indicators. They are sort of pointing towards, like, something good is going to happen in the future. So I mean, I think after, like, both of us were sort of writing all of this content, I think after like maybe 5 or 10 articles got ranked on Hacker News, right? At that time, we figured out that, like, maybe, like, we know what is the playbook, right, of getting an article to rank on Hacker News. And at that time, like, we sort of started next phase of our journey. Obviously, I mean, like, it's not like, like we started it at the right time. We also made a lot of mistakes. We kept writing blogs ourselves for a long time. The time that we could have focused on, like, building better product. But eventually what we figured out was, like, both of us can't keep writing content, right? So we have to, what we have to do is, like, we have to, instead of writing entire blogs ourselves, we have to figure out, like, what topics to write. Also, what is the outline of the blog, right? Like, maybe just headers or, like, subheaders of the blog are going to be like, and how do you plug your product at the end of the blog, right? Because in the end, it should lead to some kind of transaction where people are saying that, okay, I should use Nanonets for this use case, right? Like, this looks too complicated for me to do myself. So like, figure out topics and outlines, but outsource, like, the actual blog writing, because that is very time consuming. Another hack we did was, I mean, like, we did not really hire content writers in-house, but we found out on Medium, medium.com, like, who are the authors who are getting really good views for the kind of content that we want to write, right? And then we would approach them and we'll tell them that, like, we have this outline, we want to write a blog, here is maybe, like, $150, $200, but, like, can you write this blog for us, right? And one thing that we figured out was, a lot of people that write blogs on Medium, right, they're not professional content writers. They're working in really good companies like Microsoft, Google. They're doing this as a hobby, right? But for them, I mean, like, that $200, it's a good, I mean, like, it matters. But you end up getting really high quality content creators without, like, sort of hiring them in-house, right? Or, like, other trade-off is, like, you end up hiring content creators, but they're not high quality, right? So this is, I think, one really good way we found out of getting, like, really high quality content creators, but for, like, very sort of less cost. Second, I would say, second thing that you should start doing at this point, right? Like, when you are not writing blogs yourself, but you are letting other people write blogs for you, right? Is to set up analytics at this point. Because you need to move from the vanity metrics that are, like, views or, like, number of shares to more down the funnel metrics like maybe signups, MQLs, right? And for that, you need really good analytics for attribution. You need to know if this user came from blog 1 or blog 2, and that way you identify who are actually good authors or writers for your kind of content, right? And then you sort of give them more content pieces to write. You let go of other people's who are not that effective. Maybe they're effective in getting views, but they're not that effective in writing content that would convert for you. And again, feel free to stop me if you have any questions. So, analytics doesn't have to be sort of super complicated, right? Like very basic. So this was the kind of analytics that we had. It would talk about impressions, but also what are the signups that a blog generated for us. Yeah.
You just say we want to get a content written.
Yeah, so so for example, machine learning, right? What we would do is we would go to Medium, go to machine learning section, look at top articles. We would reach out to the blog writer. We'll tell them that we have an opportunity for you, right? Like we want you to write something about machine learning, and we want you to keep your authorship, right? Like even if you publish something for Nanonets, you are still going to be the author, right? Okay. Because they also need that social validation out of content that they are creating. They're not coming to you necessarily for $200, but they're coming.
Not ghostwritership.
No, these are not ghostwriters. No. Okay. So you have to give them proper attribution, etc. But you would just tell them that we have something for you to write. But after they come on board, you tell them that this is the.
When you're very early, why will they write for a very small company?
Yeah, but for example, at that point, right, they didn't know that we are a small company. They'd looked at the articles that we wrote ourselves, right, that were very high quality. Okay. So they were like, okay, these are sort of legit fellow authors that want to write something cool about machine learning. So they would say that okay, let's write something. And then, in the end, we would sort of give them a plug for Nanonets, right? Like at the end of the article that you could use Nanonets to accomplish the same thing. Otherwise, you would have to write the code yourself, all of that, right? Like set up infrastructure, etc. So slowly what you will see happening is that, after you have published, maybe 50 or 70 articles, right? You would see that slowly your blogs are sort of getting ranked on Google as well, right? Like not just Hacker News Medium, but Google has started picking up your articles, right? And at that point, you know that you have maybe cracked something. Google knows that you are sort of authority for that topic, maybe machine learning or could be topic that you are writing for, right? And at that point, I believe that that is probably the right point of time when you start hiring your marketing team, right? And it need not be sort of large marketing team, right? For example, right now we have monthly traffic of 400K. Our in-house marketing team is about 3 people, right? They're still sort of doing the same kind of things. They are creating outlines. They are sort of giving those outlines to writers. But you need to at this point necessarily start investing in marketing team, because at this point you start caring about all of the technical aspects of SEO, right? You have moved past the initial phase where you could just produce quality content and you are it's all good, right? At this point, maybe you are at a stage where you have 50, 100 articles, and you do need to manage those articles really well. You need to keep updating those articles because Google also sort of takes that into account, how recent the article has updated. So at this point, you have to sort of start building your own team, right? And these are some of the technical aspects of inbound. You have to do really good technical SEO where your page speeds, etc. should be really good. You should have internal backlinking where one blog is pointing to the other blog, and that also helps in ranking. Keyword research and prioritization, I think Sprinto folks talked about it in length, but I would say this is the probably right point at which you start looking at all of these things. You also need to have a good content funnel and a good pace of writing articles, right? And I think this is one of the mistakes that we did. After a point, our sort of pace of creating content just slowed down, right? Because what ends up happening is that all of the previous content that you have written, right, that keeps generating more and more volume for you, and you are okay, I don't necessarily need to produce a lot more content now, right? But what happens is that you end up seeing effect of that pause in between in maybe 3-4 months, right? So this is one very important thing to do is like, have a content calendar and almost make sure that, like, you are at a certain cadence, you are, like, sort of publishing new blog articles. Obviously, not all of those articles are going to be great articles, right? But still, you have to have, like, that cadence where you try to, like, sort of produce quality content. Some of that will get ranked, some of that won't. But, like, you have to sort of, keep that cadence. You also have to start doing content segregation where, like, some article is, like, not directly talking about use case, but it's, like, talking about, like, broader industry, etc., right? Like tofu content, versus some content is really focused on, like, one use case that you are trying to solve. But all of those are, like, sort of attracting the kind of audience that, you want to target. This is one very important thing, is that somewhere down the line, you have to make the transition from blogs to landing pages, right? Because blogs are very, like, sort of bad conversion rates. Like maybe, like, maybe 10,000 people read a blog, and that generates one sign up, right? But that is not the case for landing pages. The strategy that works is, I think, initially publish a lot of blogs, because blogs are very easy to rank. Google also gives, like, sort of more weightage to a blog because it's talking about more information versus a landing page. But as soon as, like, you start building some authority over the topic, right, you have to start publishing a lot of landing pages, because landing pages give you more conversion. But again, like, you can't publish landing pages in, like, your 0 to 1 journey, because then, like, you won't, like, have any use of it, right? Like, unless you're running ads on those landing pages. Also, at this point, you have to start measuring even more down the funnel metrics, right? For example, MQLs based on ICPs, or even qualified leads, or like qualified call setup, right? Where your marketing team is not just responsible for getting views or, like, publishing articles, but they're actually responsible for how much sales that you are doing. And like, for example, this is, like, one particular content strategy that we end up publishing. Some of the blogs are, like, sort of very vague, right? Like, convert any PDF to any CSV, but, like, some are very sort of, like, task oriented, right? Like, write invoices to QuickBooks. It's a very specific topic. These are, I mean, like, some of the mistakes that, you need to avoid. Never lose focus on quality, even, like, no matter how big you grow, right? You have to always have the quality as the top thing on your mind whenever you are writing some kind of content. Hire a team who understands product and content quality lot more than technical aspects of SEO, right? And I think the previous speaker also talked about it, where, like, you have to first hire content writers, and then, like, somebody who is specializing in SEO. But this is something that is really important, right? Like, that person has to understand what you do, what kind of content is liked by your audience, and everything else comes after that. And keep expanding scope of articles to write, right? Like, never slow down the pace. As you keep growing, you have to sort of broaden your horizon on, like, what are the things that you're writing on. Like I mentioned, top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, middle funnel articles, but you have to keep expanding the scope of articles. I think that's it from my side. Those are, like, sort of all of the learnings that we had during our journey. Not necessarily something that, like, might be directly attributable for you guys, but hope, like, you had something to learn from this. And yeah, any questions that, maybe I can help answer? Yeah.
Three people marketing team.
Yes.
Are they content writers themselves?
No, they aren't. I mean, like, if you would ask them to write a good content, right, like, for sure they'll be able to do, but that's not where their leverage comes from, right? They have the entire content in mind, but they are basically just writing, like, the headlines, right, and then giving somebody else to write it.
So who's is that? Somebody else still from the Medium?
Again, yeah, the Medium folks. Or the kind of network that we have built over the years.
And have you been able to find any agencies? Because Nanonets is a very technical topic. So have you been able to find agencies which write it, or it has to be very cherry-picked Medium writers?
I mean, we tried with agencies, but, like, they, again, like, you have to sacrifice quality at this point, right? At that point. And, like, that was something that wasn't just working for us.
And one other question, which is, is there any learning from your competitors, which you have seen they do that, and then you accommodated that into your strategy?
Yeah, so it's a very typical thing to do, right? Like, once you go into that keyword approach, right? Like, maybe you're 10 to 100. What you start doing is, like, you find out, like, what are the keywords that are important for my business, right? Like, the kind of keywords that are bringing me really valuable leads. You just search for that keyword. You find out, like, what are the top articles that are getting published. You figure out, how do I write a content that beats all of those, right? Like, what is it that, all of these people are not talking about, and how do I write about that, right? So like it's not necessarily competitors that would end up ranking, right? It could be other medium bloggers that would end up sort of ranking. Sometimes you also do affiliates where you reach out to those bloggers and tell them that I also want to include Nanonets in your blog somewhere, right? But again, the goal is sort of to beat everything that is being written. How do you produce even higher quality content than whatever is ranking currently for that keyword?
So how do you differentiate? Between writing technical content versus more business-focused content?
Yeah.
And in your initial days, how were you prioritizing time on writing content versus building product?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing was that we always looked at that in parallel, right? So we would almost, what we would do is, we would write content that would force us to write code for that content, right? So for example, that blog about how do you run machine learning models for Raspberry Pi, right? For that, we had to do a lot of product ourselves, where you have to figure out how do you quantize models. You end up learning a lot of things from those blogs. So I would say almost product and content would go hand in hand.
One more question. So the example that you showed was more of a horizontal one, right? So say for example, extracting contents from a document.
Yeah.
That is something that can apply for different verticals.
Correct. Yes.
So when you went to the next step of 10 to 100, how did you pick your vertical? For example, if you pick an insurance document,
yeah,
that needs a whole domain experience, expertise and stuff.
Correct.
Similarly, you look at banking, fintech, or whatever, right? Yeah. So how did you go to the next step when you went into the content creation mode?
Yeah. So I mean, it happened the other way around, right? We started with very horizontal product, but we figured out that this is one industry, right? And for us that was sort of finance industry where there is a lot of paperwork, there are a lot of manual process. So then what we started doing was there was an example of kind of blogs we wrote, right? We started we started writing lot of content particular to AP automation industry, for example, right? Where number of technical blogs that we wrote reduced a little bit. Our ICP also changed from a developer to more sort of business user, right? And that sort of showed up in the way we wrote content as well. So you have to iterate on content based on what kind of use cases your platform now supports or you want to focus on. Yeah, they did. So I think one of our first machine learning hire, right? He would spend almost 25% of his time writing these outlines and writing this code for the blogs, etc. So they did.
Something on the lines of the product. So I'm also building in the horizontal space, a pure tech company. So when you're trying to place your product in customers' POV, say in your case, for example, if you're working on unstructured data, you're structuring what the invoice looks like. So getting from 0 to 60% accuracy, 0 to 70% accuracy will be okay with some people. But then moving to 70 to say 95 would be a very different problem. And that only comes when you closely work with some of the other vertical. So how do you differentiate or place yourselves in that direction?
Yeah, I mean,
so
I
a
think
horizontal product to a vertical shift.
Correct. Yeah, I think that happened very organically for us because we had horizontal product, right? We would get all kind of use cases, right? And then we would see what kind of customers are sort of being more successful. They are getting more ROI from our product, and we would end up getting more data for those kind of customers, right? And then we would fine tune our models, for example invoices, and it would get better for invoices, and that's kind of like a feedback cycle, right? So, I mean, I think with horizontal product, you, based on all of the users that you're getting, right, you automatically end up figuring out what kind of users are being more successful on my platform. And then you automatically start tuning your product for that particular user more, right? As well as the kind of content that you publish.
Okay. So was it the initial adopters were okay with 70% of accuracy or whatever the metric was? And then slowly, as in when you work more with them,
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So initial adopters, I mean, so initially we were building a very broad computer vision platform, right? You could do almost any task, but we saw that a lot of people, and the kind of platform that we had built, right? It would basically detect people or cars in an image, right? And we saw that people were coming us with documents and like, they wanted to draw boxes on documents so that they will figure out like where the field is, right? And that's how we figured out like, document is a big use case for us. And like, we sort of tuned our platform for documents and that started growing like crazy.
Okay, that answers, thank you.
Yeah, I think we're like over time. So, yep. Thanks. All right, thanks a lot.